Jimmy Smith, I've long maintained, is the most underrated receiver of all time. I think statistically, like, he never really gets talked about as a potential Hall of Famer, but his numbers, like his like 7-8 year peak, is about as good as just about anybody not named Jerry Rice or Randy Moss or Terrell Owens. I mean, I'll throw Natrone Means.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into Monkey Knife Fight Live. I'm Dan Watkins, a special Thursday Night Football edition, Week 4, and even better than just regular Thursday Night Football. It's a battle of the big cats, Jags, Bengals, Thursday night in Cincinnati. And joining me, I mean, who else would join me when we're talking Jaguars football other than Nick Whalen of Rotowire.com? Nick, what's up, man? First thing I got to ask you, though, is tonight finally the night? Does the streak end tonight?
I'm worried that it might. You know, I have a lot of leverage, in terms of the Bengals winning this game. So part of me, kind of wants the streak to continue for, personal gambling reasons. But at the same time, it feels like there's a little too much momentum in favor of the Bengals. And I don't have a lot of good things to say about the Jaguars. We don't have to rehash the failed flea flicker that essentially doomed them after a great first half against Arizona last week. But like, statistically, it's just really hard to lose 18 games in a row. They'll be going for 19 tonight. I think only 2 other teams have gotten to 20. That is a dubious crowd that you do not want to join. I don't have a lot of bad things again to say about Cincinnati, but it does feel like the Bengals are a little too heavily favored going into this game. I think the line is 6.5, maybe even 7.5 at some books. And after the fight that we saw the Jaguars put up for at least like 2/3 of that game last week, I know Cincinnati is coming off of a fairly impressive win against Pittsburgh, but we're only 2 weeks removed from the Bengals losing to the Chicago Bears, which, as we saw last week, that Bears offense is nothing to write home about. I think the Jags actually put up a fight in this game, and it's maybe not as much of a laugher as a lot of people are expecting.
I think, when I first saw this game on the schedule, I think a lot of people probably felt this way. You're looking at it like, oh, Jags, Bengals, Thursday night. That's what we have to put up with this week.
That's not how I looked at it, but yeah.
Yeah. But I feel like this is one of those games, though, that could sneaky turn into just like a really fun game to watch. And like, you're flipping through the channels, if you didn't tune in right at the start of the game at 8 o'clock tonight. And then it's like 9:30, you're flipping through. And then all of a sudden this is like a tied 21-21 game in the third quarter, and Lawrence and Burrow are slinging it. And I think it's just going to make for a fun DFS and a fun MKF contest night with this game.
Yeah, no question about it. I think we've had a few games already this season that you and I and the general public at large have kind of expected to be, low scoring or boring or, a blowout one way or the other. And pretty much all the primetime games have lived up to the hype. I mean, I guess Eagles Cowboys the other night was maybe the one exception, but we've had a lot of games that don't look great on paper and have ended up being really entertaining. And I think we're going to get another one of those tonight.
So before we get into the DFS stuff, I thought we'd start off this week by just remembering some names. I put some stuff out on some social media for people to just give me some random Jaguars from the past that just off the top of your head. And a couple of them that I got: Tony Baselli, Justin Blackman was a good one that I haven't heard in a long time from Oklahoma State.
Yeah. All right.
Blake Bortles obviously is everybody's favorite. A lot of Fred Taylor mentions. Jimmy Smith.
Yep.
James O'Shaughnessy, who I think is on the team now. I don't know.
I don't even know. They just traded for another white tight end. I'm not sure what's going on with O'Shaughnessy, honestly.
And then Maurice Jones-Drew, obviously, also.
Yep.
These are weak names.
Yeah, these are like A-list Jags, honestly. I wouldn't say these are quite deep cuts, but I mean, all great players in their own regard. Jimmy Smith, I've long maintained, is the most underrated receiver of all time. I think statistically, like, he never really gets talked about as a potential Hall of Famer, but his numbers, like his like 7-8 year peak, is about as good as just about anybody not named Jerry Rice or Randy Moss or Terrell Owens. I mean, I'll throw Natrone Means out there. Like, when I was in my Jags fan infancy, that was like Natrone Means was handing off the torch to Fred Taylor. Steve Berline was kind of in the mix with Mark Brunell. Keenan McCardell, one of my all-time favorite Jaguars, probably my number one. Donovan Darius, another guy that I loved growing up. For a while, it felt like Rasheed Mathis was the only good player on the team.
So who's your first jersey?
First jersey. Well, I think I got 2 jerseys the same year. In like 3rd grade, I got a note that I was growing up in Appleton, Wisconsin. So this is like 15 minutes from Green Bay. I received a Jerome Bettis Steelers jersey and a Mark Brunell Jaguars jersey.
All right. I like
Which
it.
back then, I don't even know where you get something like that. I've never really inquired. Like, I don't think you could just go to a store, in Green Bay and pick up a Mark Brunell Jags jersey. And I don't know how available these were on the internet in like
I
1997.
was going to say, not to age
So
anybody, but this is long before NFL.com had any jersey you wanted
You
available.
probably had to
Right.
drive to the Mall of America in Minnesota and
Yeah.
like an NFL store there and just get them. But my first jersey, I think, was Drew Bledsoe from the Pats. But
that's a strong jersey.
Just because we're not biased. I mean, we do love the Jaguars here, but we love the Bengals too. So let's remember some Bengals while we're at it.
Of course.
Andy Dalton, of course, is the first one that people tell me, ha ha ha. Yes, red hair. I get it. Funny. Pac-Man Jones, Dre Kirkpatrick, Delta O'Neal, Ocho.
Delta O'Neal.
Chris Collinsworth, the master of the chair slide. Don't forget, he was also a very good wide receiver for those Bengals teams in the 80s. So, Johnson, Corey Dillon, love Corey Dillon. Just some great Bengals too. But let's move on. We're done remembering some names for this week. Let's move on. Let's talk some DFS here. Before though we start talking about these quarterbacks, we have a special giveaway this week, a Twitter giveaway. So Nick, no pressure. But if any of your Jaguars more or less picks are correct tonight, we're going to give away 20 $10 NFL tickets at random. So if Nick wins, you win. Basically, how this is going to work, we're going to send out a tweet later on Thursday. And if you like it and retweet it, and Nick gets one Jaguar pick correct, we're going to pick 20 random winners. Nick, how's that sound?
Easy money. I mean, I've never been more confident in anything in my life.
All right. Sounds good. Let's get right to it. Let's talk about the quarterbacks. You got the rematch of that 2019 national championship game. Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow. That was Trevor Lawrence's first ever loss as a starting quarterback. Mm-hmm. Pretty crazy. And now he's got 3 in the NFL, but that's just what happens. His more or less number this week, 250.5, 3 games so far in his career for Lawrence. He's just hit that number just one time in his career, and that was week 1 against Houston. Struggled mightily against the Broncos, and then last week he was okay against Arizona, finishing with 219 yards. Mm-hmm. The Bengals defense, they're giving up about 238 to 240, right in that range there per game. But the Bengals secondary, they could be without one of their safeties. Jesse Bates likely out. Trey Waynes, cornerback, expected to make his Bengals debut tonight. The corner missed all of last season with a pec injury. He's missed the first 3 games this season. He's supposed to play tonight. How do you feel about Trevor Lawrence?
Well, first of all, Bates is officially out per the good folks at Rotowire.com. So that is big for Cincinnati, potentially big, for Trevor Lawrence and that passing game. I'm inclined to go under on this number. I think we finally saw the Jags get James Robinson more involved on the ground last week. And honestly, I think when you have a rookie quarterback, even someone with the pedigree of Trevor Lawrence, the key is having a reliable running game that you can fall back on. And that was not a part of the game plan whatsoever in that Houston game. They fell behind early. Lawrence had to throw the ball 51 times in his debut. I don't think that was the plan. They were unable to get the ground game going in week 2 as well. And we saw how it changed the dynamic of the team when you actually have that option. They were, like I said in the opening, they played an almost complete game against Arizona, against a team that I think is significantly better than Cincinnati, and we're leading that game, for more than a half. So I think that's the key for them. I think it's getting James Robinson, maybe even getting Carlos Hyde involved on the ground. I don't think you don't want Trevor Lawrence to have to throw the ball 45 times. If he does, he's going to go over that number. But I think ideally, they're able to keep this game a little bit closer. They're able to control the clock. They're not taking some of the chances that have led to so many turnovers, so many picks for Trevor Lawrence so far. So, I think we see a calmer, more controlled Trevor Lawrence, maybe not taking as many of those long shots. And I think that results in him going just under this number.
Calm, cool, and collected Trevor Lawrence tonight. I like it. Let's see what happens. Then you got Joe Burrow on the other side, 259.5. His numbers ticked up a little bit since we originally released these lines earlier this week. Now, no T. Higgins tonight for the Bengals, so that's going to take away one of his top 2 pass catchers. Obviously, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd's still there. The Jags are giving up about 302 yards per game. So they're getting shredded.
I don't like how you said that, but that is accurate.
Yeah. So Burrow, though, his season high passing total was 261 against the Vikings, and that game went to overtime. After that, just 207 against the Bears. And then last week, a very efficient game, 14 of 18 for 172 and 3 touchdowns. So they didn't really have to throw the ball that much because Pittsburgh, I think, is just kind of turning into a dumpster fire this season. But we'll leave that there. So Joe Burrow, how do you feel about him? 259.5.
This is kind of one of those like unstoppable force, immovable objects where like the unstoppable force is the Bengals not really letting Joe Burrow fall out and, kind of being conservative and running the ball. And the immovable object is like this horrific Jaguar secondary. Of course, they just traded last year's number 9 overall pick for like a conditional third rounder and a slow tight end. So that they just lost even more depth in that secondary. This one's really tough. I mean, I think against almost any other team, you would feel pretty comfortable about that under, right? I mean, you mentioned like the only game that he's gone over this number was week 1 against the Vikings. He's slinging the ball around. They played almost a full overtime period in that game, so a ton of extra time. And he still barely goes over. But I mean, this Jaguar secondary is horrendous. It hasn't really mattered who's playing quarterback. They're getting sliced up. Even if they're, a team like Arizona falls behind, you never really feel like they're out of it because you could get a big play on this team left and right. The big thing is not having T. Higgins. Jamar Chase has certainly been impressive, especially relative to how he looked in the preseason. And you still have Tyler Boyd alongside him. So it's still 2 good receivers, but I think T. Higgins is kind of quietly still the number 1 target for Joe Burrow. Maybe as the season goes on, Jamar Chase, really takes over that role. But I think it's a big deal not having T. Higgins. So that's a pretty big benefit, against an overmatched Jaguar secondary. With that said, man, having watched all 3 of these Jags games to completion so far, you really can't overstate how out of sorts.
By choice, right? Those will,
of course, yes. You really can't overstate how bad the secondary has been. It really has been. It's been bad. I think Burrow does go just over this number. I think the only scenario in which he doesn't is if this game is like last week, where the Jags just can't move the ball. Like Pittsburgh was unable to do anything, and Cincinnati was able to go up 2 scores and kind of just sit on that lead and bleed out the clock in the second half.
All right, and let's talk about some of those pass catchers, wide receivers. You got Tyler Boyd. More on Burrow, yes.
I'm going more on Burrow.
Okay, just making sure.
Just a bet against the Jags, yeah.
Pretty safe.
Could be anybody throwing the ball.
Let's move on to the wide receivers here. Tyler Boyd, 64.5 is his number tonight. When I first saw this, I thought that was a little high, but then you got to remember, as we just talked about, T. Higgins is out tonight, so Boyd's probably going to be that number 2 option behind Jamar Chase. He could even be the number 1 option. He did have 9 targets in week 2. He had 6 last week against Pittsburgh. So he's gone more, 64.5 just once, and that was week 2 against the Bears. He finished with 73 yards. 2 games in his career against Jacksonville. Last year, though, he did have a very good night. 7 catches, 90 yards, and a touchdown against the Jags in 2020. So he does have some success against the secondary in the past. How do you feel about Tyler Boyd tonight?
I like the more here. I think, like you said, if T. Higgins is in this game and this is the same number, it's really more borderline. But I think he can hit this fairly easily. He went over this number against the Chicago defense that is astronomically better than the Jags, and honestly, a defense that shut down this Bengals offense for a lot of that game. A lot of those yards came late. After Joe Burrow threw those 3 consecutive picks, the Bengals, very quietly made that a game and almost came back and won it in Chicago. So, if he could do that against a vastly better defense, a defense that was in Joe Burrow's face the entire game, I don't see why he can't do it against this Jags defense that has been among the worst in the league. And again, without T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd kind of becomes the 1A, 1B with Jamar Chase. So I think this is another game where maybe he sees 8, 9, 10 targets, and all he has to do is probably catch 4 or 5 of those, 1, maybe 2 big plays. And I think he hits that over very comfortably.
Yeah, I like the more there too, because if we're going more on Burrow, I think you got to go more on these receivers, especially when I feel like the total number is kind of low for a number 2 target. And then favorite target for Trevor Lawrence, you got Marvin Jones Jr., the former Bengal, going back to play his former team. I couldn't believe when I looked at this guy's the targets he's getting so far. He's gotten 28 targets in 3 games, which I feel like is just crazy for Marvin Jones. But here we are. So his number this week, 68.5 in that more or less matchup with Tyler Boyd there. He's gone over it just once, finished with 77 yards in week 1, but he's been very consistent. About 55 yards in week 2, 62 yards week 3. As I mentioned, he's Trevor Lawrence's favorite target. So how do you like Marvin Jones tonight?
Another really difficult one. I mean, until last week, he's been super inefficient. You mentioned the target share. He's gotten a ton of targets, but he caught 5 of his 9 in week 1, 6 of his 11 in week 2, and then finally, 6 of 8 in week 3. So that's a little bit more encouraging. Maybe starting to develop a little more chemistry at least with Trevor Lawrence. But you're totally right. He is their number one guy. I mean, I think a lot of people are still on DJ Chark, who has racked up a ton of garbage time yards and touchdowns over the last couple of seasons, but even if you watch this team in the preseason, if you're paying attention during training camp, like Marvin Jones has been the guy that Trevor Lawrence trusts the most. Ideally, maybe not the type of player you want as your number one receiver. Probably ideally suited as like a mid-tier number 2, but that's the state of the Jacksonville Jaguars right now. And I think in a game where they're, as much as I think they want to control the ball on the ground, I think they're going to make an effort to do that in the first half. I also think there's a chance that fails. And, in that scenario, you're probably starting to air it out a little more. And again, I think Trevor Lawrence trusts Marvin Jones more than any other receiver on this roster. The yardage total it's a little higher than I would like. I'll still go more on this. If he goes more, it's not going to be by much. I would almost rather, bet Marvin Jones to get in the end zone than to get to 69 yards. But I think he comes in right around this, and I'll go just over. So give me the more on Marvin Jones.
All right, and I just want to point out Marvin Jones started his career with the Bengals, moved on to the Lions, and then to the Jaguars. So he's got 3/4 of the Big Cat circuit. So let's hope let's hope he gets to Carolina before his career is over with.
He has to. Not many people have been able to complete. I think that I don't know what's the word when you do 4 things. I was going to say trifecta, but not many players I think have done the full Big Cat.
Basically hitting for the cycle.
Yeah, right.
The Big Cat circuit. Let's just call it the Big Cat circuit. Anyways, and then let's just quickly talk. There's 2 other wide receivers here in this game that I think people are going to be playing as well. You got DJ Chark for the Jags. 52.5 is his more or less number. Hit that just once way back in week 1 when he had 3 catches for 86 yards. He had 12 targets in that week 1 game, and he's had just 10 combined total in the 2 weeks since. So how do you like DJ Chark tonight?
Again, another difficult one. It's so hard to predict. He's another receiver that's been pretty inefficient. Especially week 1, 12 targets in that game, 3 catches, and then only 4 targets in week 2, 6 targets last week. Did get in the end zone in that game, had a really nice catch to put the Jags up, and then was pretty much quiet the rest of the night. So, I mean, it's 52.5, very much attainable in an offense that really leans heavily on Marvin Jones and DJ Chark, but if I'm going over on Jones and I don't think Trevor Lawrence has a big night, I think I have to go under on DJ Chark. He's kind of been more of their big play guy. And we saw it last week. He is capable of getting in the end zone, but I don't see him racking up a ton of yardage in this one. I think the Bengals defense is able to control Trevor Lawrence and for the most part, limit this Jags offense. So I'll go over on Jones and less on DJ Chark.
And then back to Cincinnati, you got the touchdown machine so far to start off his career. Jamar Chase, 4 touchdowns in his first 3 games. I feel like I don't have it off a hand here, but I feel like he's got to be closing in on some sort of record to start his career for consecutive games with a touchdown. But anyways, his yardage total for tonight is 72.5. Hit that just once. That was back in week 1. He finished with 101 yards. Then he's finished with 54 and 65 in his past 2 games. But as we talked about with this Jacksonville defense, is tonight the night Jamar Chase goes over as well.
Yeah, I think much like Tyler Boyd, I think he benefits from T. Higgins not being in this lineup tonight. I think I really like this more. On Jamar Chase. The target share hasn't been ideal the last 2 weeks, just 9 targets against Chicago and Pittsburgh combined. But again, you have to consider Joe Burrow only threw the ball 18 times last week. Just kind of a weird game, not one that you can make a lot of takeaways on. And again, without Higgins, I think that makes me feel really good about Jamar Chase against a Jag secondary that is more prone than any secondary to giving up big plays.
Yep, I like the more on there too. And then finally, let's end here. Let's talk about the running backs. Joe Mixon, his numbers creeped up to 90.5 as his more or less. 151 rushing yards and 2 TDs versus Jacksonville in that game last year. Just ran all over them. Jacksonville's also given up about 115 on the ground per game. I was reading some general fantasy articles this week, preparing for the show, and there is a lot of love for Joe Mixon. There was a couple of notable NFL fantasy guys that were saying that I don't think that they couldn't name 5 running backs they'd rather have the remainder of the season than Joe Mixon. That's a lot of love there for Mixon, who has had some injury problems in his career, but he's healthy, good to go tonight. So 90.5 more or less. How do you feel about Mixon?
I'm inclined to go more. I think, especially in a game, that Cincinnati is favored by more than a touchdown, that implies that they'll probably lead relatively comfortably, at least for parts of this game. And, at that point, you're going to want to run the ball. Mixon has been fantastic. He's been, I think, one of the breakouts early on this year for a guy who's been, good, not great over the last couple of years. I think he's finally looking like he might take that step forward that a lot of people thought he had in him all along. The Jags run defense has actually not been that bad, for as bad as the overall defense has been, but the pass defense has been, far more the issue. They're kind of right in the middle of the pack in terms of rushing yards allowed. And they're third in the league in terms of rushes against, I guess. So teams, their teams have ran the ball against them 101 times already this season, which is the third most behind only Philly and Seattle. In terms of yards per attempt, the Jags are sixth in the NFL. So, maybe a lot of that is it's the end of game scenarios. They're running it. You're just kind of stacking the line, that type of thing. But the Jags run defense hasn't been that bad. So that's something to consider. But with that said, Joe Mixon, I think is a little bit overwhelming for this team. I think he can beat you through the air as well. Obviously, that doesn't matter for this prop necessarily. But I'm going to go over on Joe Mixon. At the end of the day, it just comes down to not trusting this Jaguars defense overall. So even though they do deserve some credit for not being a complete sieve against the run, I think they're going to run into some issues tonight.
And then you got James Robinson on the Jacksonville side. 52.5 is his more or less. 17 carries for 75 yards against Cincinnati last year. Robinson had a very good game against Arizona, finishing with 88 yards on the ground and a touchdown. Before that, and this is kind of my problem with Robinson, is he going to get enough touches running the ball? Right. They're going to use him in the pass game. But you got Carlos Hyde there as well, who's going to take away some carries from Robinson tonight. Cincinnati's giving up about 78 rush yards per game, so a sneaky kind of good running defense there for the Bengals. But do you like James Robinson tonight to go more or less on that number?
It's such a low number that I think it is attainable. I do lean toward the more. I just threw out that stat about yards per attempt against the Jags. Cincinnati is one of the few teams that's ahead of them in that category. They're a top 5 defense against the run in terms of yards per attempt, allowing 3.3 yards per carry. So James Robinson is the type of player who, can break tackles. Is capable of busting a big one, but he has only one run of 20 or more yards this season, and that came last week against Arizona. So, the Jags have had some issues, I think, opening up holes. They've had some issues, getting those big plays, not through the air. And obviously that's backed them into some corners, I think, where they feel like they have to force things, and that's led to some turnovers. Again, though, I think this line is just low enough that I feel comfortable going more. As I said at the top, I think they want to finally take some of this pressure off of Trevor Lawrence, not make him feel like he has to make these hero throws that for the most part have not resulted in positive results for the Jags. So I think there is more of an effort to get James Robinson going. We'll see what the receiving versus running split is for Robinson. He had 6 catches out of the backfield in that game against Arizona. So good to see him get more involved there. But I think he is capable of going just over here. I think James Robinson can get to 60, 65 yards in this game.
Yep, I like it too. These numbers tonight they feel low, and
they do.
I don't know if that's good or bad or whatever, but we'll find out tonight. So anything else from this game you want to talk about here before we wrap things up?
I'm nervous, that's for sure. Any time that you could be put on the cusp of all of a sudden next week could be the 20th consecutive loss for the franchise, I would prefer to avoid that. But yeah, like I said at the top, in my pick'em leagues and fantasy and whatnot, everything is pushing me toward I want the Bengals to win this game and Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase to rack up a bunch of yardage. But then of course my heart wants the Jaguars to win. So I'm very much conflicted. I'm going to be watching the game with a bunch of friends tonight. This is a pretty big occasion in my life when the Jaguars are on a channel that you don't have to go to, buffstreams.biz to find. So again, kind of a big deal. So there's a lot on the line for me personally tonight. The Jalen Ramsey jersey is going to be out. I do think we're going to get a decent game. I think this game has been made fun of, maybe more so than any so far. I know the narrative of the Jags on Thursday nights, whatever. But I think they're going to impress some people. Maybe they don't win the game, but I don't think they make a mockery of the franchise tonight.
Yeah, Dan, I'm bringing Dan's tone into question on some of these tosses when it comes to the sarcasm of the Jacksonville Jaguars versus the Cincinnati Bengals.
Look, if you lose 18 games in a row, you're able to say whatever you want.
Just as long as they're not wearing those god awful color rush jerseys tonight. Thank God the NFL did away with that because those were just absolutely horrendous.
Oh yeah, the honey mustard. Yeah, that was tough.
Whatever they were, honey Dijon. I don't even know. Mm-hmm. It was awful.
For those in the Twitter contest, it's Marvin Jones more than 68.5, James Robinson more than 52.5, or Trevor Lawrence less than 250.5, and everybody wins. Nick wins. Everybody wins.
And if you really do like Nick's picks tonight, feel free to try our 6x6 contest as well. Enter those; those are fun. We had those up on the stream here a little while ago, but those are a great way to win some money. I mean, look at that! You can buy-in's $5, you can win 200. Can't beat that. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us tonight. I don't even know what's going on here because every time we talk about Jacksonville, some sort of technical issue pops up. So I think that's just the football god saying enough. And anyways, I think that's going to do it for us. Nick, where can they follow you?
You can follow me at my last name, but the L is the number 1. So at WHA1EN.
Great. And you can follow me at Dan Watkins Radio on Twitter. Enjoy the game tonight, guys, and good luck. Win some money.